developing those. And it doesn't matter how, whether it's top-down or bottom-up, it was doomed to fail. If you could say there's 20/20 hindsights, but actually even Fleming said when penicillin is resistance will develop. And this is what happens. I disagree with Gates in the sense of, yes, just saying you can eradicate disease and surrounding yourself with advisors who will support yourself, and that ignored a massive proportion of the community in the scientific community who said that ain't gonna happen because we haven't got the tools. It required, Gates spent a huge amount of money on a vaccine where I think 80% of the malaria community would have told you it isn't gonna work. So the challenge is to get the right people who also sometimes say things which maybe the leaders don't want to hear. Whether it's top-down or bottom-up is the actual thing is about you can convince from a top-down perspective, engage properly, and I think this is the point you're making, with the communities to get the buy-in, but it can be still a top-down, developed at the top, implemented downwards and engaged. Or it can come up with solutions from the affected communities which learn from data, experience, and drive future development. So I think this top-down, bottom-up is actually distracting from what you really need. Is you need to have the tools to drive eradication, and then with the tools, you can need to engage the people that you're trying to help. Because, look, we've come back to Ceylon backwards and forwards. Ceylon or Sri Lanka was malaria-free. It came back, and it was one of the few which actually was malaria-free after the 1950s. Then it came back with a vengeance. Now it's malaria-free again. So it can work in a regional context to drive eradication of the disease. Was that top-down, bottom-up? At the end, who cares? You need to have the tools. And so now, having made that comment, I actually want to come back to a question, because this is about future threats also. And you talked a lot about surveillance, influenza, and you made a comment about detecting future outbreaks. And I think from a Singapore perspective, SARS, between it being recognized and being here was a few days. I had just moved to Singapore. I had a fantastic experience of living in Singapore, having the impression that if you go shopping or go to the restaurants in Clarke Quay, you can always get a seat because there was no one there. The whole shop area was empty. But from historical data, what can we learn using surveillance right now of predicting future risks and outbreaks? The question I have is how can we, because I think this is the thing we're worried about. You had the Ebola virus picture at the beginning. Singapore is actually quite concerned about Ebola coming into the country. It's one flight away. It is quite concerned about what's happening in Brazil with the massive yellow fever outbreak there. Is there a risk of something moving in here? And we don't understand why there's no yellow fever in Southeast Asia. So in all this, how can our understanding from what's happening historically, what tools we have available right now in surveillance, how can we pull this all together to be better at identifying something happening before it hits us like SARS, or even worse? And that's for you not to ask.
Maybe if I could just answer the end part, on kind of the future threats and what's happening. I don't know if you realize, but there's a lot of surveillance going on. Like, how when you go to some countries and you come out of the airport, they're like measuring your temperature and so on, right? And then for NTU, once in a while they ask you to give your temperature. If there's a little outbreak, they'll say, can you give your temperature? Is it above 36.9? And our schools, in the primary schools and secondary schools, there's this type of temperature taking, but on a larger scale. So if you have like 10 kids apparently who have, who don't come to school, then they ask all the other kids to give the temperature. But nobody knows where all that data is going. So that's not the MOH patient data. that is the surveillance data. Like whether you just keep it in, you know, somewhere in the school desktop or in Changi Airport, nobody. So kind of like that's, you know, that's what I think where there is a potential about streamlining this information. And you talked about, you know, Ebola just being a flight away. If people are taking their temperature before they go on the plane and they're coming off, you know, and we're not using that data, we're kind of missing some opportunities there. And on top of that, it's also the strains that are coming from different parts of the world. Right now, we are at the end of the southern season, going into the northern season. And I went to ask my doctor, I said, oh, you know, can I have the vaccine? Because, you know, it's coming up to autumn and so on. They're like, no, they haven't announced it yet. You know, they're trying to see what's happening because Australia apparently had a kind of a tough flu season. So sometimes in Singapore, the flu season, the southern strains actually go on much longer, and as a biologist, I think you'll be in the best position to say. And you know, for part of our northern season, we could be having the southern strains. And nobody really knows this because we don't go outside the country. It's only when we look at the patients, what's happening in Singapore, but we never try to kind of link it to people coming from Australia or you know, the north, and then kind of link that to the threats. I haven't seen much of that in the literature. And I think our NCID, they recognize that and want to do that, but because many of these types of activities are now moving into multidisciplinary territory, so is this, you know, if we're doing something at the airport, is this MOH, or is it like national security, or is it transport, Ministry of Transport, you know? So I think this is kind of like one of the challenges for the future. There's opportunities, but yeah. And I think Sanjay, we were talking about, I gave a talk in Geneva, and then he's like, who are the people who invited you, you know, was it like people from dengue or, you know, the infectious disease, and it was people from digital technology. So there was a group that was looking at like new technology, but not really linked to it, you know, so I think even that, like how we kind of fit in and who kind of owns these type of activities when so many parties are involved is yeah, I think it's a challenge. Interesting research question.
Right. Just add one point that's from parasite research, parasite research perspective. We try to build up a database, not only Singapore, maybe East Asia. Try to build a system by different species and region, and try to build up the system. So that we can key in and try to retrieve this kind of parasite was infected in which region, which population. This is quite viable, but that say because parasites a bit challenging because if as I presented, if the parasites bigger or like if their morphology preserved pretty well, it's easier to collect the data. But some of the parasite species very small, and really this can really destroyed by the weather conservation condition. So what we can provide is a database, but it's not perfect for this sort of parasitic infection database. And another idea is we can try, based in Singapore, because a lot of FYP students, they are interested, from history, they are interested in disease research. So once they go to the National Archive or data they collect, we can build up database. So once you have database and we can connect together, then we can see the trend of a certain diseases. But again, it's maybe not perfect, but it's maybe possible to combine.
So, I mean, you know, when you look at the history of, or rather the unpublished documentation relating to polio eradication program, what is very striking is that the goalposts have moved. So when in 1988 the polio eradication program started, the claim was that every form of polio was going to be eradicated. Today, when you read the definition of polio eradication, that definition now says only wild polio is covered under that definition. Why? Because there's vaccine-derived polio. And you can't really eradicate that. In fact, some of the current outbreaks that are happening in South Asia are vaccine-derived polio. But they're not being counted as outbreaks because they're not wild polio. So I think if you speak honestly off the record to, I think, Afghan public health workers or Indian public health workers, that distinction matters. Because by the 1988 definition of polio eradication certainly hasn't worked. By today's definition of polio eradication has worked. And the irony is that many Indian public health workers will say that the vaccine is a suspect one because it is causing vaccine-derived polio in states like Uttar Pradesh, which were high endemic areas where, you know, India's remained polio-free, but only wild polio-free, not vaccine-derived polio-free. And the point remains is that the program is over budget, way over budget, has missed multiple temporal deadlines. And there is now desperation even amongst those who oppose vertical programs, elimination programs within WHO, that this disease just has to be eradicated now. Because it's detracting us, it's detracting national planning, it's detracting international planning. So in a very odd way, there's now more than ever before an alliance that let's get rid of polio, let's get rid of the problem so we can focus on other things. And when that happens, I think there'll be an almighty clash, both in international governments and national governments, and there'll be allies from both within the WHO and outside the WHO, which is why bottom-up, I think, does matter, because none of this happens without political alliances between those who will be proposing malaria eradication and those who will be proposing the strengthening of health systems and universal health coverage. And that is when there'll be money from global funders versus money from the UN taxpayer coming into competition. So it'll be fascinating as analysts to sit back and see what happens. In terms of how can we prepare, what is the database, I think the historical material I've always seen has left me with a very important message, that international bodies have to recognize local infrastructural capabilities. So DRC cannot be forced, the Democratic Republic of Congo, its government cannot be forced, for example, to sign up to a global health security standard that perhaps America is confident of delivering for its people, because it does not have that capacity. So what, therefore, is the message? The message, therefore, is that we have to be humane and empathetic enough to have global health security protocols within developed country contexts, but that are humane and sensitive enough to be adaptable to the conditions in countries whose governments and societies are less fortunate than us. So what does that then mean? It means there is a moral, ethical onus on us. Singapore, by OECD definition, is one of the rich countries. I stay in a rich country, although sometimes when I look at the resurgence of malnutrition amongst poor school children, I wonder where the ethical responsibility has gone in the UK. But it means the people in the UK or perhaps in Singapore, when we are developing an ethical protocol, about limiting infectious disease spread have to develop a protocol which is de-racialized. What do I mean by that? So countries like ours send people out to the trouble spots to help and eliminate disease. If one of our citizens holding our passports catches that disease, like Ebola, he or she will be flown back and given the best care to make sure that he or she does not die. If, let's say, someone from DRC Congo with Ebola travel into the UK and happen to be infected with the disease and fell ill in India, we therefore have to have those ethical protocols making sure that that traveler has exactly the same rights to life. If we do that, I believe that we, as rich countries, are fulfilling a global obligation. So it becomes an ethical, moral issue. And then there's a question of aid. So I think the UK approach to it has been through DFID of providing DRC a lot of aid, therefore creating a situation where Ebola is controlled, limited, not spread, but also to create surveillance at entry points, both by air but land. You know, the surveillance structures are being strengthened. But I think ultimately rich countries like ours have to realize that by helping them we help ourselves, which is what you were, I think, also hinting at. I mean, we are in a globally interconnected world. Aid is not just about aiding others, aid is also helping us. And maybe our own taxpayers could be better briefed about that. And we are in an interconnected world where air travel is so easy, so the spread. And you know, there are no travel restrictions from colleagues traveling from Brazil. You mentioned Brazil. And there are, very strikingly in Brazil, and I will link all of you when I go back, to this wonderful network of Latin American intersectoral group of workers who are trying to strengthen epidemic preparedness. And it's, I think, in a united, connected world, we also have to work in a united, connected manner. So we can argue, or people can argue, but at some point the arguments have to stop and realize that actually we're arguing about making the world a better place. So why not combine forces and actually make the world a better place? So much time is wasted arguing, and money, in programs that then weaken each other. So that is, if history teaches us something, competition only weakens all the programs, whereas cooperation can never be imposed. That is the problem.
Okay, with that, I would like to draw this morning's session to a close because it's coming up to 12 o'clock now. So first I would like to thank our speakers once more and our commentator. Tremendous contribution. Also to thank everyone here for coming here and participation and sharing your thoughts and comments with us. We prepared a simple lunch just outside, and everybody's welcome to join us and stay and mingle and talk some more. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.